Today I want to talk about glue blocks, why you might want to consider using this technique that a lot of people are unfamiliar with because it's kind of old school, when you want to use it, why you want to do it, and how you're going to do it. So if it's something you're interested in, keep watching. Hi, this is Mike Peace Woodturning, and I'm passionate about woodturning, and I want to share with you tips, tricks, techniques, and projects to help you become a better turner. Now, I guess the first question we need to deal with is why you'd want to consider using a glue block. Let me show you. Okay, one reason, maybe you've got some very expensive exotic wood that you want to make a box or something out of, and for every inch you use, it's going to cost you $1 or so. So you want to minimize the loss of the wood. That's one good example. Maybe you've got a nice little scrap like this one. I was getting ready to make some globe ornaments when it occurred to me I probably ought to talk about glue blocks. I found this little scrap of walnut burl. It's just perfect for a globe, but only if I maximize every bit of it. I don't have enough wood here to make a tenon. So there's another example using a glue block. Similar goes for this little scrap of Osage orange that I had to make a nice globe, but again, I don't have enough wood to do anything but make the globe if I put a glue block on it. Other examples might be you've got a bowl blank. You want to make a deep bowl, and this is a pretty good sized blank, but I've got to take out some of the top of where the pith is, so it's going to reduce it a little bit. So instead of wasting the area on it for a tenon or a recess, you might want to consider using a glue block. Or let's say you're making a small saucer or plate out of a 3/4 or 1 inch board where you can't afford to lose anything. This would be a good candidate for a glue block. Okay, there's the why. Now let's talk a little bit about what kind of wood you might want to use. Depending on the project you're making, if it's something very small and you don't mind and you feel like end grain will work, you can look into your spindle scraps, and let me show you what some of them that I have saved, just a few of them. I've actually got another box, but here's where I saved some additional in these drawers. I try to keep a good supply of glue blocks in a couple of drawers handy of various sizes, threaded and otherwise, so they're always ready when I need them. So sometimes the easiest glue block is just grabbing a spindle scrap and facing it off because it's already got a tenon on it. May already have a through hole in it. Now, keep in mind, the spindle scraps are normally going to be end grain, which doesn't always give you the best hold. So in most instances, you're going to want to use cross grain wood. You want to use preferably a tight grain, non-porous, and dry wood, something stable. Could be maple is good. Oak or ash, probably not quite as good, but they can all work depending on the size of your project. This is actually somewhat porous that I'm going to make some blocks out of today. This is some dried pieces of sycamore. So let's get started. Let me show you how I go about doing that. So we're going to take this scrap of sycamore. I could draw centers, but I'm not going to get that fussy with it because it's going to be round when we finish. I'm just going to look at what appears to be the center. I'm going to go ahead and mark that. I'm going to use a friction chuck by basically jam chucking this against the set of jaws. Go ahead and bring up my tool rest at an appropriate height. Turn it, make sure it's going to clear. And then first thing I want to do is go ahead, I'm going to turn this thing around, and for that I'm going to use a small bowl gouge. This is a 3/8 inch bowl gouge. Let's turn this up a little bit. Now, I think it's important to mention, because this is side grain, that is going this way, sometimes I'm getting end grain, sometimes I'm getting side grain. You can see it's tearing out when it's coming around and plucking it out, and it's cutting smoother here. For this reason, you would not want to use a spindle roughing gouge. Spindle rough and gouge is never used on side grain work. In effect, this is the kind of blank similar to a small bowl blank. You would not use this because it's not designed for it. For the same reason, you probably would want to avoid using something like this beading and parting tool or some other parting tool to square it off, because it's going to have a tendency to grab. So I'm going to come in from the side. Controlling this carefully so I don't drive it into the chuck. You can, like a spindle, you can see if it's round by just tapping the top. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Next thing I'm going to do is I want to put a tenon on this side, and I'm going to mark it like this. And that should give me a pretty good sized tenon. I'll grab my calipers to double check that. I want the tenon to be, somewhere, in my case, about 48. And you can see I'm right on the money, about 48 millimeter. So I'm going to switch to a smaller tool rest so I can get in a little bit closer for closer support. And I'm just going to come in again from the side. And you're going to make it a tenon appropriate shape for your chuck jaws. In my case, for this Nova, these are parallel. I don't have to put a dovetail on them. So I just want to make sure I'm glancing down it and it looks square. And then I want to make sure it's nice and clean in the bottom. And bring this across. So I've got a nice smooth flat surface to mate on. Okay, so there's the back side. Now I can go ahead and put this in a chuck and face it off. Now, it's good to try to size this as close as possible to the optimum size. This is a little bit larger than optimum, but it's pretty doggone close. In other words, don't have a real big gap here. You want to have maximum steel on the wood. And now I'm just going to face this off, make sure it's perfectly flat. Actually, it's going to be slightly concave, because I want to make sure that the widest surface is on the outside, the most prominent. You do a scraping cut. Now, before I go too far or call it quits, I want to get a ruler and set it on here to make sure this is indeed flat. As it turns out, this one's just about right on the money. I've got a very nice surface, except I've got a little bit of rough here and a little rough here, so I don't have it completely cleaned up. So let's go back and do it a little bit more. And we go back and check it with a ruler. It's slightly concave, which is okay. I want the glue on the outside. I want the outside to be contacting the wood. If it's got a little bit of a gap in the middle, that's okay. So basically, this is just about ready to use. This sharp edge here, just I like to get in the habit of getting rid of that. Just nick it off. Now, I talked about glue blocks just a little bit in an earlier video. I'll have a link to that here on using hot melt glue, and it's good to have that little chamfer area when you're separating blocks. Sometimes it's easier to get a chisel or a skew in there if you've got a little bit of a bevel. It's not a bad idea to drill a hole right there in the middle to help you center your work on if you're doing it off the lathe, where you can actually put a small pin or a piece of wire through it to into the center of the piece. That's not a bad idea. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and just drill a small hole. So let me just chamfer this just a bit so I get a starter. And I have a 1/8 of an inch hole drill mounted in a handle, so I don't have to bother with a Jacob's chuck. This comes in handy for a number of things. There we go. Now I've got a hole that I can put a pin through the back. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now I'm going to get off a little bit on a tangent. Earlier I was reaching into a box and I got a little bitty, caught a corner of sharp wood as I reached in the box. Drew a little bit of blood on this nick. I tell you what, it's awfully handy to have a liquid skin in your shop. I had a video on first aid, but go out on Amazon and pick up some of that stuff. It's handy to have because putting a dab on it stops the bleeding and facilitates the healing, and it prevents you from getting an infection. All right, so here's the block, and I'm going to mark the center of this. We're going to take the block of wood. I've hit this against the belt sander so it's somewhat flat. We got the center marked. I'm just going to hit it with a little accelerator. Then I'm going to take the glue block we're going to be using, and I'm going to take that medium CA glue, and we're just going to put a ring of this all the way around the edge. Not going to worry too much about the middle because we know that's a low spot, but we've got a fair amount on there. Then I'm going to put this little spring piece of spring on it to make it a little bit easier to find that center of this that I've already marked. And now I just bring them together like this, and we're just going to hold it for a few moments. And we've got a little bit of leak out, which is good. I'm not going to squeeze too hard. Now that I got it squeezed a little bit, we can kind of set it down, and we're going to let this, we can wait a couple minutes. Now I got to tell you, my preference is probably to use Titebond 2 and go or original Titebond, any carpenter's glue, and use that on here, and go ahead and bring it up and just go ahead and put it on your lathe and bring up tailstock support to hold it, and leave it overnight because I'm never in a big hurry. I don't like the smell of CA, and that's generally my preference. But the CA is certainly faster. This is probably ready to turn. I'd go ahead and bring this tailstock support up just for a safety measure. And now we're ready to start turning that globe ornament. Actually, it's not a bad idea to, when you get something like this glued up, and I do this thinking, uh-oh, I hope this thing doesn't fly off while I'm demonstrating, and just kind of hit it a knock to show that it is fastened on there pretty good. I'd still use tailstock support as long as possible. Now, if you didn't use the accelerator, you're going to have to wait a little longer for it to dry because it may take I'd leave it an hour or so, at least 30 minutes to let it cure on the inside. Otherwise, you have a chance of it failing. But when you put the accelerator on one side, glue on the other, really 2 minutes later, this thing is ready to go. So we're ready to start making a globe ornament. If you're a visitor, you watch this thing to the end, give this thing a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Y'all stay safe and come on back here.